Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Rhiannon Jacobson, Director of Strategic Accounts for the U.S. Green Building Council.
I've always wondered who chooses the walk-on music. It was a good one. Good morning, Greenbuild. That seems a touch loud for the room, so maybe I'll bring it down a tiny bit. My name is Rhiannon Jacobson. As they mentioned, I am with our strategic accounts team, and one of the areas that I oversee is our philanthropic work. I'm pleased to welcome you this morning to the Greenbuild Master Speaker Series session. It's a big title. There are a lot of programs at Greenbuild that are important, but a topic that is particularly interesting for those of us in the nonprofit space is how to raise the funds needed for our work. I think we all can agree that money means mission. Many of us value the kind of transparency, innovation, and public platform created by our speaker this morning. DonorsChoose.org has revolutionized how resources can be effectively channeled from donors to public school classrooms, connecting donors with teachers, students, and impacting lives and communities. It was the very first civic crowdfunding platform of its kind, and it's received Charity Navigator's highest rating every year since 2005. Our master speaker today is an innovator, an educator, and a thought leader in philanthropy, and it's my pleasure to introduce Charles Best, founder and CEO of DonorsChoose.org. Charles? I am assuming Charles will be coming to the stage. In between, I can tell a cat story or talk about the weather.
There are few times in history when the saying, "we're all in this together," would be more applicable than right now.
Charles Best, he came up with a revolutionary idea during lunch in the teacher's lounge.
My colleagues and I were talking about books that we wanted our students to read, field trips we wanted to take them on, art supplies that we needed, but these ideas wouldn't go beyond the teacher's lunchroom. And then I just figured that there were people from all walks of life who wanted to help improve our public schools.
Through Donors Choose, ordinary citizens can directly fund projects initiated by enterprising public school teachers.
Teachers request dictionaries, science kits, field trips, resources that their students need to thrive. Then you can give to the project request that most inspires you with a donation of any amount.
It's such a simple, wonderful idea. You know exactly who you're helping and how you're helping them.
I love to give and know that I have a connection.
It's a very easy way to give back to public schools.
This is exactly the kind of social innovation we should be encouraging across this country.
I love DonorsChoose.org, and it's why I'm on the board and why I'm committed to helping it in any way I can.
Make sure you check it out, DonorsChoose.org.
Let's not underestimate the power each of us has to change the world for someone.
Hey there. Good morning, everyone. Hi. Thank you so much for that introduction, Rhiannon, and thanks especially to each of you for lending an ear this morning. I am honored to be here. It's been a little while since I've been to New Orleans, and in preparing to come speak with you, I wanted to get a feel for this incredible city. And knowing what Greenbuild is all about, I wanted to specifically get a feel for the green movement in New Orleans. So I went to a website called Kickstarter. How many of you have backed a project on Kickstarter before? All right, the vast majority of you. Awesome, even the young folks here too. For the few of you who didn't raise your hands, Kickstarter is a funding platform for creative projects. Last year, people raised $500 million through the site. And I want to show you just 3 projects that people right here in New Orleans have gotten funded through the site. On the left, you'll see a project called Protei from a guy named Cesar Harada, who designed an autonomous, robotically controlled, open source sailboat that can tack upwind and intercept oil sheens as they come downwind. In other words, it's an open source, robotically controlled sailboat that will attack oil spills. And 300 people gave Cesar $30,000 so he could develop the prototype for this oil spill attacking sailboat. In the middle, you see a project from a woman named Megan Newsmere here in New Orleans who every year takes people out to pick fruit from trees growing in New Orleans itself, not just gleaning fruit from orchards that have been picked, but even harvesting fruit from trees right here in New Orleans. She needed $10,000 for a van to keep her program going, and people all over the country gave her that funding. On the right, you see a project on Kickstarter which is to sustain a food security academy that's run during the summer that enables folks in the lower 9th Ward, young people in the lower 9th Ward, to grow food and learn about how to run an urban farm. Now, only 5 years ago, the creative people behind these projects would have needed a rich uncle, or industry connections, or years of working their way up the ladder before they could have done these projects. Kickstarter does away with all that. It lets you ask your friends and the world at large to support your creativity without any gatekeepers or tastemakers standing in your way. If your idea is awesome, it'll probably get funded. So after checking out the New Orleans offerings on Kickstarter, I went to Etsy. How many of you have bought something on Etsy before? Raise your hand. All right, awesome, vast majority of you, including a lot of the young folks here. So for the few of you who didn't raise your hands, Etsy is a marketplace of things that are made by hand. Last year, people bought and sold more than $1 billion worth of crafts. Did you know that people here in New Orleans have 35,000 different items, different crafts for sale on Etsy at this moment? We're looking at 3 of them. On the left there, you see a dining room table that's been made from reclaimed wood. It was the exterior of a house that was flooded during Hurricane Katrina, and it's now being used to build these beautiful dining room tables, even as the house itself was rebuilt. And in the middle, you see something that its creator calls a fleur de bris, because it's a fleur-de-lis made out of Mardi Gras beads and a Zulu emblem and all sorts of found items. And on the right, you'll see a wooden bow tie, itself made of reclaimed wood, where even the fabric is from old neckties that the creator found. So many of the items for sale on Etsy are made by people who used to work office jobs all day, reluctantly. They really wanted to be crafting, but they could only do so as a hobby in their spare time. Few of these people could have raised the money you need to make a prototype that a factory can manufacture, or persuade Macy's or Walmart to sell their product, or raise millions of advertising dollars to persuade consumers to buy their product. That's a process which lets only a lucky few become designers. And of course, it's a process that can suck the personality out of your creation. Then Etsy came along. Now crafters can pursue their passion as their day job and sell their creations to people all over the world. They don't have to break through all the barriers that until recently stood in the way of anyone who wanted to make beautiful things for a living. So after checking out all of that New Orleans has to offer on Kickstarter and on Etsy, of course I had to go to donorschoose.org and I checked out some of the 1,800 projects that teachers right here in New Orleans have gotten funded through our site. On the left, you'll see a project called the Green Thumb Project from Ms. Nickel at Renew Cultural Arts Academy, who wants both gardening supplies and cooking supplies for students to grow food and eat that very same food. It's $300 worth of materials she needed, and several people in different parts of the country gave her that funding. In the middle, you'll see 7th graders in Mrs. Fontenot's class at Benjamin Franklin Elementary Extension, who have this incredible project that it's called Bayou Bears to the Rescue. Nearby, a nursery has some wetland plants that are dying, and Mrs. Fontenot and her students want to nurse these wetland plants back to health, for which they need water quality testing kits because they're going to reconstruct ponds to have a place to resuscitate these dying wetland plants and bring them back to life. About 50 people gave $1,200 so that Mrs. Fontenot could do just that. And finally, on the right, you'll see students in Miss Clanton's class at Edna Karr High School. Do we have a representation from Edna Karr High School? That's awesome, yes. Fantastic. So this is really an incredible project that they have going on. Biology students, under the supervision of a university, are growing wetland grass and looking to plant it on Grand Isle, the Barrier Reef Island, not too far from here. And Ms. Clanton wants to make sure that art students are part of this journey. And so she requested sketch pads and all sorts of art supplies so that students could illustrate this incredible adventure that they're on, growing wetland grass and planting it on Grand Isle. And I'm so excited that some folks from those schools are actually here. Thank you. So at DonorsChoose.org, teachers go straight to the public with their best ideas for helping students learn. They don't have to get the sign-off of an administrator. They don't have to fill anything out in triplicate. In fact, there's nothing standing between their idea and a potential supporter. There's a change underway, which I want to talk about with you this morning. It's a change in who you have to know, and how long you have to wait, and how lucky you have to be to bring a good idea to life. It's about a new kind of marketplace where gatekeepers do not stand in your way. DonorsChoose.org is a pioneer of this movement. We launched years and years before crowdfunding was even a word. So I want to give you the inside story. And then we're going to do something that's never been done at Greenbuild before. I have one last question, one last show of hands I'd like to see. How many of you had a teacher in high school who changed your life? That's awesome, most of you. I had a teacher like that. There he is. His name was Mr. Buxton. He was my English teacher and my wrestling coach. And when I showed up as a dorky freshman in high school, Mr. Buxton spoke to me like he would to any adult. If he approved or disapproved of something I'd done, I knew it right away because he didn't have that mask that some grown-ups have when they're talking to kids. If I asked him a question on Wednesday, he'd come back to me on Friday saying that he'd thought about it, and he really had. He made you feel like he wanted you on his team. And thinking back on it, looking back on it, it was definitely Mr. Buxton who made me want to be a teacher. So 14 years ago, I started teaching history at Wings Academy, a public high school in the Bronx. But Wings Academy did not have the same resources as when I was in Mr. Buxton's class. Where I went to high school, we went on field trips into the woods, we had graphing calculators for trigonometry, art supplies to do just about any art project we did not want for anything. When I started teaching in the Bronx, I saw firsthand that all schools are not created equal. My colleagues and I would spend a lot of our own money on copy paper and pencils, and we would see our students going without all the materials they needed for a great education. We'd talk about books that we wanted our students to read, and a field trip we wanted to take them on, and a science experiment that just needed a pair of microscopes. And I figured there must be people out there who'd want to help teachers like us if they could see exactly where their money was going. So using pencil and paper, I drew out a website where public school teachers could create classroom project requests and donors could choose a project that they wanted to support. For $2,000, this programmer who had recently arrived from Poland was willing to build that site. It was super rudimentary. The back end of the site was one page that you'd have to scroll down for like 15 minutes to get to the teacher or the project that you were looking for. To process a donation, I had one of those black boxes that you see at the grocery store when they can't swipe your credit card, where they type in the credit card number and the dollar amount, send it over a telephone line. So it was like PayPal, but by hand. It was a very good thing my students were helping me to launch this site. Then I had to get my colleagues to try out the site and post the first projects. Now, I don't know how it is at the organizations and businesses where you work, but at the high school where I was teaching, and I don't know what it's like at Edna Karr, but at the high school where I was teaching, if you wanted to get folks to do something, you gave them free food. And what you see right there is my mom's roasted pear dessert. She made these pears with orange rind and apricot jam and spices. And let me tell you, they taste something delicious. And I brought 11 of these roasted pears into the teacher's lunchroom. And as my colleagues prepared to pounce, I said, hold up, there's a toll. If you eat one of these pears, you got to go to this new website called donorschoose.org and ask for whatever it is you most want for your students. Propose the project that you've always wanted to do with them. Sounded like a pretty good deal. Took my colleagues about 2 minutes to scarf the 11 pears. And then they proceeded to post the first 11 project requests. And what you see right there is the health teacher who ate the dessert first. She wanted to do a pregnancy prevention project for which she needed baby think it over dolls, which are life-size, life-weight dolls that cry at 3 in the morning and need to be fed and show a teenager what their responsibilities would be if they were to become a parent. The English teacher, he wanted to prepare his students for the SAT, so he requested test prep books. Art teacher wanted to do a wall-to-wall quilt with each student sewing a square, and for that she needed fabric and thread and needles. My aunt, who's a nurse, funded the first project, but I didn't know any more donors to fund the other 10 projects, so I funded them myself, which I could afford to do because I was still living at home with my parents, and they weren't charging me any rent. But because I donated to my colleagues' projects anonymously, they mistakenly thought that the website worked, and that there were all these donors on the site just waiting to fulfill teachers' classroom dreams. That rumor spread across the Bronx, and teachers started posting hundreds of projects that needed a whole lot more money than what I could afford by living at home. I was in a really tough spot not knowing how I was going to get those projects funded. My students came to the rescue. They could see the potential of this experiment to change their lives at school. And I think they also felt bad for me. So for about 4 months, they volunteered every day after school to spread word to potential donors. They addressed and compiled 2,000 letters by hand to people all over the country, telling them about this website where someone with $10 could be a classroom hero. We wanted to get the cheapest postal rate, so we sorted the mail ourselves, and every desk in my classroom was piled high with envelopes. Then we carted the sorted letters to the post office and crossed our fingers. It worked. My students' letter writing campaign generated $30,000 in donations to classroom projects on our site. We were off. Another year went by. More teachers in the Bronx created projects. Donors funded some of them. And then 9/11 happened. And teachers at the schools beside Ground Zero started creating projects to recover from the attacks on the World Trade Center. There was one high school architecture teacher who wanted his students to be able to build their own model of what buildings should be rebuilt. There was an art teacher who wanted to bring in an Afghan artist so that students could learn about Afghanistan. There's a first grade teacher whose kids had been saved by a particular group of firemen, and her kids wanted to thank those firemen by doing a musical performance in front of their fire ladder company for which they needed musical instruments. There were hundreds of these projects related to 9/11, and I thought that local media would jump on this story. This was right when people yearned to participate in the recovery effort. The Red Cross had almost too many blood donations to put to good use, and here was this direct way for people to help. But I must have called 100 reporters, and none of them would give me the time of day. I couldn't get any of them to talk to me. So I figured I better aim higher. Holy Grail at the time was the New York Times. They had a new reporter covering nonprofits and philanthropy. Her name was Stephanie Strom. I figured if we could get Stephanie Strom at the New York Times to do a story about our website, we would have a shot at big-time impact. So I put together a package of materials. I mailed them off to Stephanie. I didn't hear back. So I called her up a few weeks later, and she was nice to me. She said that we were awfully small potatoes. She said, if ever I'm doing a listing of online charities, which at the time, back in 2001, was a new concept, maybe I'll put you on that list, but I'm afraid you're not exactly newsworthy. Damn. Then I found a directory of the top people at Newsweek, and I called the senior editor there, Jonathan Alter. I called him first because his last name began with A, and he showed up first in the alphabetical directory. And I called him during my lunch hour, and his assistant must have been out to lunch because he picked up the phone. I said, hey, I'm a teacher up in the Bronx. I started this nonprofit with my students. Do you want to hear about it? And he said, sure. He didn't hang up on me. We talked for 45 minutes, and that night, he wrote a column for the Newsweek website suggesting that this experiment growing out of a Bronx classroom might one day change philanthropy. So then I called up Stephanie Strom at the New York Times, all excited, and I said, hey, Newsweek saw us as newsworthy, at least for their website, so won't you give us a second look? And then she dashed my hopes. She said, I wouldn't touch your story with a 10-foot pole now that another reporter has covered you. The New York Times does not follow in the footsteps of other publications. Felt like an idiot for having told her that another media outlet had broken our story. So I wrote her an email apologizing for being so dumb. And Stephanie took pity on me. She could see how badly I felt. And she wrote back to me and she said, you shouldn't feel quite so bad because you didn't have a chance in the first place. Because her editors had asked her to focus on charities responding to 9/11. So there was my last opening. I crafted this email to Stephanie telling her about all the projects that teachers beside Ground Zero were creating on our site related to 9/11. And I called her up. I called her over the weekend, so I would go straight to voicemail and I wouldn't interrupt her while she was on deadline. And I said, this is the last time you're ever going to hear from me if you could just read this one final pitch. Monday, I was back at school teaching, checked my email in between periods. Stephanie had written back. She wanted to come do an interview for a major feature story in the New York Times. Let me tell you, I was over the moon. My parents raised me to be humble, but this was the New York Times. It felt like the skies had opened, and I just had to shout. So I forwarded Stephanie's email to my friend, and I said, guess who said she wouldn't touch our story with a 10-foot pole and now wants an interview? That's what hustling will get you. I beat my chest. I talked all kinds of smack. I thought that I'd hit the forward button, but I'd hit reply. And the moment I realized, I yanked the electrical cord out of the socket to turn off the computer, but it was too late. I sent that trash-talking, guess who said she wouldn't touch our story with a 10-foot pole, chest-beating email to Stephanie Strom, philanthropy reporter for the New York Times. So naturally, I sent her another email apologizing for being so dumb. And to Stephanie's eternal credit and mercy, she did not hold it against me. She went on to write a major story for the New York Times, saying that DonorsChoose.org would likely one day be the future of philanthropy. And since that time, we've been working our tails off to at least try and prove her right. Today, more than half of all the public schools in America have at least one teacher who's created a project on our site. More than 1 million people have given over $250 million to projects that have delivered books, art supplies, field trips, technology, to more than 12 million students, overwhelmingly from low-income communities. I never thought, thank you. I never ever thought that one day I would be at Greenbuild sharing numbers like that, and I never dreamed that crowdfunding would become part of the zeitgeist. When DonorsChoose.org began, crowdfunding wasn't a word, but now it's become a movement. Today there are hundreds of sites where people on the front lines can identify a need they see, propose a project they want to do, secure a loan for a venture they want to start, and then anyone, no matter the size of their wallet, can become a patron, a financier, a philanthropist. And crowdfunding's only going to get bigger. I'll bet you that within the next 10 years, crowdfunded projects and ventures will account for a real percent of our country's gross domestic product. So now I want to tell you how we've made crowdfunding work in public schools. When a teacher submits a project, when they create a project, we first make sure it's legit, and we email follow-up questions to the teacher if anything is unclear about what students are going to learn. This school year alone, we're going to get probably 200,000 classroom project requests submitted to our site, each of which needs to be carefully reviewed and vetted. We used to pay people to do that work, and then we realized that we could enlist our best teacher users to volunteer their time to vet other teachers' project requests. So now if you're a teacher and you've had more than 20 projects funded and shown yourself to be an incredibly responsive, responsible educator, we invite you to volunteer your time to vet other teachers' project requests. You can think of this as like academic peer review meets Wikipedia. And now that we crowdsource this labor to our best teacher users, the time it takes us to vet and post a project has gone from 10 days, when we were paying people to do it, to 1.5 days, now that our own teachers are volunteering their time to do it. That's the power of pushing intelligence out to the edge, of seeing your so-called beneficiaries as your coworkers, which is what crowdfunding is all about. So now the project's up on donorschoose.org. At any moment, actually, as of today, this morning, 41,000 classroom project requests are live on our site. That's a lot to pick from. So we encourage donors to express a personal passion and look at the projects that match. A few years ago, a writer for Fortune magazine was doing a story on Kiva and donorschoose.org as the two websites that Fortune thought were going to change philanthropy. And the writer seemed decently impressed by our site, but after our interview, he said that his personal passion was saving the salmon in the Pacific Northwest, which was his nice way of saying that he would not be contributing on our site. But before he left the room, I did a keyword search for salmon in the Northwest on Donors Choose, and up came 5 classroom projects that matched. The second result was a project from a teacher at a high school in Oregon who had created a salmon hatchery in the river flowing by his school, and he needed hip waders for his students to maintain and build out that hatchery. Top result was a project from a teacher on an island off Alaska teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. She wrote in her essay that she was 45 minutes away from the nearest store by airplane, and all of her students are Native Alaskans. They had recorded their parents' folk tales about salmon, done research on salmon, and wanted to share that work with the outside world, for which they needed a printer and a scanner. So here was this guy who had a specific passion for salmon in the Northwest, and he had 5 projects to choose from. And as a result, there's a group of high school kids in Oregon who now have the hip waders they need to build out their salmon hatchery. Last part of the Donors Choose process is the best part. When a teacher gets a project funded, we don't hand out cash. We purchase the resources and have them delivered to that teacher at that school. And then every donor, even if they've given just $1, gets photographs of their project in action, thank you note from the teacher, an impact letter describing what students are learning, a cost report showing how every dollar was spent. Donors who give $50 or more also get handwritten student thank you letters. Our donors get to see and feel the impact that they've had. So that's how we began. That's how it works under the hood. But the real story of donorschoose.org is the 250,000 teachers who use our site to give their kids a better education. I want to tell you about just one of those teachers. Debbie Gardino is a special education teacher in Chesapeake, Virginia. Big reason she became a special needs teacher is that her son is Asperger's. His doctors and even his teachers predicted that he would never graduate, never be independent. But Debbie believed otherwise, and her son proved otherwise. A few years ago, he got his master's degree, and last year, he got married. Debbie's gotten funding for 60 classroom projects on our site. One of the most recent ones was touchscreen tablets for students of hers with cerebral palsy to communicate for the first time. When Joplin, Missouri was hit by a tornado, Debbie took matters into her own hands. She flew down to Joplin on her own dime, of her own volition, and went door to door telling any teacher who'd listen about donorschoose.org. A number of the teachers she spoke to told her about a young man named Will Norton who had been driving back from graduation when the tornado sucked him out of his car. what people said about this young man struck a real chord with Debbie. I think it reminded her of her own son, and she dedicated her mission to him. Debbie inspired half of all the teachers in Joplin to create 800 recovery projects, 800 calls for help for rejuvenating Joplin classrooms. These projects requested classroom furniture, playground equipment, first aid kits and flashlights, therapy resources like knitting needles and yarn, books, and more books. 5,000 donors fully funded nearly every single Joplin project. At the reopening of Joplin schools, teachers greeted Debbie with screams of joy. Many of them had gotten funding for enough projects to rebuild their classrooms even better than before. And a year and a half ago, you'll remember another horrific tornado, this time in Moore, Oklahoma. 27 school district buildings were damaged. 3 schools were absolutely flattened. 7 students died. I'll give you one guess as to what Debbie did. She flew down to Moore, Oklahoma, and went door to door telling teachers how they could use our site to rebuild after their disaster. But this time, Debbie didn't go alone. She was joined by 3 teachers from Joplin, Missouri, who'd used our site to rebuild, and they road-tripped down to Moore, Oklahoma to tell their brethren in the teaching community about how they could use our site to connect with our community of citizen philanthropists and rebuild. A number of the projects that teachers in Moore, Oklahoma created and our donors funded $1 million worth of recovery projects from Moore, Oklahoma. And a couple of them came from a teacher named Karen Marinelli who had saved her students' lives during the tornado by lying on top of them. But the roof caved in and it broke her back. But she returned to teaching September before last, uncowed and in a wheelchair. And let me tell you what an honor it was for us to fulfill her funded projects. It was bookshelves and a reading rug, classroom library, and a rocking chair that she could move into from her wheelchair. As you can gather, DonorsChoose.org is the backdrop to hundreds of thousands of human interest stories, and I really appreciate you letting me share a couple of those stories with you. Some people say that that's all crowdfunding and DonorsChoose.org are good for. Some one-to-one connections, some feel-good acts of kindness, but nothing that's going to change the system itself. A lot of traditional foundations and policy experts ask, where's the beef? They even worry that Donors Choose might let government off the hook by letting private citizens step in when the system is falling short. Well, this morning I want to tell you about 2 ways that we think that DonorsChoose.org can help to change the system itself. I want to respond to that skepticism by telling you about these 2 ways that we could have an impact far beyond the books, art supplies, field trips, technology that we deliver. The first way is by helping entrepreneurs and inventors introduce new inventions and services directly to teachers. For a long time, entrepreneurs have stayed away from K-12 education because they did not see a market where the best product wins. Instead, they saw 10,000 different school districts, each with its own procurement official, California and Texas state commissions that you've got to penetrate, and they did not see the real front-end users, teachers themselves, being given much of any decision-making or purchasing power. So that instead of not wanting to hire a force of salespeople and lobbyists to penetrate that morass, entrepreneurs turn to their energies to other sectors. But now, entrepreneurs can use Donors Choose to circumvent the educational industrial complex and directly introduce new inventions to teachers. We're looking right here at 2 examples, and I'll be super impressed if anyone can call out what both of these devices are. 3D printer is one. 3D printer on the left. What about the thing on the right? All right, we'll get to that in a second. So in fact, the device on the left is a 3D printer. We had on our site a $2 million match offer for any teacher in a low-income community requesting a 3D printer. I talked to one teacher who was using her 3D printer to teach her students about the manufacturing and prototyping of synthetic limbs for wounded warriors. The device on the right is an open source underwater robot that you can control with a remotely, and that has a video camera so that you can explore bodies of water, go under the ocean, into a river, and see what's underwater. And there's a match offer on our site for quite some time for any teacher who wanted to request an open source, the Open ROV underwater robot to take their students 12,000 leagues under the sea. Maybe not quite that deep, but deep enough to experience an ecosystem that they would never otherwise come in contact with. Now, MakerBot and Open ROV, the two companies behind these devices, would never dream of hiring salespeople and lobbyists to break into K-12 education. But by using our platform, they've been able to introduce 3D printing and underwater exploration to hundreds of thousands of students from all across the country. And we think that more entrepreneurs and inventors may want to take the same approach. Second way that we think we could help to change the system itself is by opening up all of our data. 250,000 teachers and more than half of all the public schools in America have created 700,000 project requests on our site. So we've now got statistical significance for the resources that teachers most need in particular cities and states and districts. We've got significance for the 10 books that Louisiana high school teachers think are most effective at getting kids hooked on reading as expressed by the projects that they're creating on our site. Significance for the technology devices that middle school teachers in low-income communities think are most needed as expressed by the projects that they're creating on our site. Our dream is to help governments spend taxpayer dollars in a way that's more wise, more efficient, more responsive to classroom needs as they emerge in real time, to give voice to teachers at the budget-making table and policy-making table. Founder of LinkedIn and CEO of LinkedIn made a donation so that we could hire a top-flight data scientist. And his job is to make this vision come true. He started by looking at what fuels citizen philanthropy on our site. And I want to share just a couple of his fun findings. First, he found that women tend to donate to classroom projects throughout the school year on our site, whereas men tend to donate on special occasions and holidays. And this doesn't have anything to do with being in the workplace or not, because most people donate when they're at work. The only hypothesis we could come up with is that altruism comes naturally to women, whereas men need an external stimulus to tell them to be philanthropic. So actually trying to invent all these holidays, and we're going to tell our male donors about them so that they'll contribute to projects. Continuing on this more humorous bent, I'm not going to ask Leos and Cancers to raise their hands because your cohort not only makes smaller donations, but gives less frequently. Aries and Taurus, you give frequently, but donations from your cohort are smaller on average. And are there any Capricorns in the audience who'd like to raise their hands? Congratulations, because your cohort not only makes larger donations, but also gives more frequently. And we have no idea what's behind that. It is actually statistically significant. Getting a little bit more substantive, teachers have created 103,000 book projects on our site. And the short of it is teachers are trying to tell the powers that be that every school, every middle school at least, should be stocked with Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Now I'm going to show you just one chart that has a couple numbers on it. You don't even have to look at the numbers. I will simply tell you that this is an illustration of the impact of the recession in low-income versus upper-income public schools. And what you'll see is that in low-income public schools, the recession led to a 5x increase in the proportion of projects requesting really basic materials like paper and pencils and dictionaries, as compared to enrichment projects for butterfly cocoons or a field trip to Grand Isle Barrier Reef or to Washington, D.C. Whereas in upper income communities, the recession led to no such increase in the proportion of requests seeking really basic materials, which is to say that the recession had a terribly disparate, regressive impact on public schools, leaving kids in low-income communities without basic classroom essentials, while kids in upper-income communities, which I'm sure were still somewhat struggling, nevertheless, they had the basics in their classrooms. So just gives you a flavor for the potential of our data to give voice to public school teachers. We think that teachers, hardworking teachers, know their kids better than anybody else in the system. And if we can just listen to them, we can create much smarter policy, make much better budgeting decisions. And we think that with 250,000 teachers creating 700,000 project requests on our site, we can now provide teachers with that voice and deliver that data so that people all over the country can finally listen to teachers and what they're trying to say. So now we come to the final part of my remarks, where we're going to do something that's never been done at Greenbuild before. The council was kind enough to offer me an honorarium for coming to speak with you this morning, and I want to ask you to spend my honorarium on classroom projects of your choice. So when you walk out these doors, you're each going to be given a $25 Donors Choose gift card to spend on a classroom project of your choice. Now, this is the gift of giving that our board member, Stephen Colbert, gives to every guest who goes on his show. And I'll just give you a few examples. So Amy Sedaris on the left, after she went on the Colbert Report, she spent her Donors Choose gift card on a Tennessee teacher's request for science equipment. Kevin Bacon, after he went on the show, he spent his Donors Choose gift card on Lincoln Logs and Tinker Toys requested by a Brooklyn kindergarten teacher. David Mamet, in the middle, the playwright, he spent his gift card on a New Orleans teacher who was requesting art supplies for her students to express their feelings about the BP oil disaster. Christiana Manpour, she supported a project from a teacher whose students are on the autism spectrum and who needed tactile materials. And Tom Brokaw supported a tablet request from a teacher in Washington State. I can't wait to see what projects you choose to support. And when you take this action, when you spend this gift card on a project of your choice, you'll be card-carrying members of this crowdfunding movement. And I hope you'll put our search to the test. Look for projects from your hometown or projects requesting equipment in the sport that you played in high school, or supplies for the hobby that you're pursuing right now, or requesting the book that is from your favorite author. Find a project that really speaks to you personally and tell the teacher and students why you chose their project. And when you do this, I just hope that you will appreciate what you and a great teacher can do together when gatekeepers do not stand in your way. Thank you for your time this morning. Do we get to do some questions now? Awesome. Hi.
My name is Karen, and I am here as an ambassador to New Orleans. And I'd like to welcome, thank you so much. I want to welcome all of our 60 teachers and New Orleans public school students that we have here today.
Wow, seriously.
We have Ben Franklin High School, the New Orleans Math and Science High School, we have Edna Carr High School,
wow,
and we have Bonneville High School, and we are so thankful to be a part of this. Thank you so much for coming, and we're so excited. So thanks, y'all. Thank you for supporting our Louisiana Green Schools effort.
Serious. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for being here, teachers and students. You're my favorite people to talk to. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Leisha. I think
Hi,
that
Leisha.
you're awesome.
Thank
It's
you.
amazing what one person can do. And I'm curious to know, do you get concerned about future donations? Like, do most of them come from recurring donors because they're so inspired by the success stories? Or do you rely on, the Colbert bump and the Oprah bump and things like that?
Yeah, we rely on all of those things. About half of, so this school year, we should do about $75 million of giving to classroom projects on our site. And about half of that will actually come from foundations and corporate partners who will do a match offer for every single Louisiana high school teachers project or every single Arkansas art teachers project. So about 38 million is going to come from in big chunks like that. And then of the other kind of 37 million that will come from citizen donors, just given $50 at a time off their credit cards. The bulk actually, thankfully, is now recurring donors and folks who are coming to our site because either they know the teacher who created a project or because they love this model of being a philanthropist, even if they only have $10 to spare, and finding a project that's reflects their passion for Shakespeare or gardening or yoga or green architecture. So thankfully, the volume that we're doing is not a function of the Colbert bump or Oprah's endorsement, although that was the case during those years when we had the Colbert bump and the Oprah endorsement. And in those early years, it was a concern that we were reliant upon one-time crazy media events. Thankfully, now we're really standing on our own two legs.
Hi, my name is Nick Gigante. I have a question for you.
Hi.
This is incredible. I mean, this is great what you just started in 2002. I have a question regarding how is this managed and financed?
Yeah. So when someone picks a classroom project to support, during the checkout flow, they're encouraged, but they're not required, to allocate 15% of their donation to support our operating expenses. And more than 80% of donors keep that 15% optional allocation included in their project donation. And that now pays all our bills. It took us 10 years to get to enough scale where there were enough donors funding enough classroom projects and enough of them including that 15% before that 15% actually paid our rent, but now it does. And we're one of the very few charities that is therefore self-sustaining. It's been 5 years since I've asked anybody for help with the rent payment, which is liberating for those of you who are in the charity and nonprofit world. And it means that whenever we sit down with a funder or a donor or a company, the only conversation is, what classroom projects are you going to support?
Hi, I'm John Peralka from Ben Franklin High School in New Orleans, and I want to thank you. In 10 years, personally, I've had 3 projects that have been funded, anywhere from materials to do projects in the classroom that required visuals, and materials to do notebooks in the classroom too. Our school, Ben Franklin, in the last 10 years, we were flooded. We got instruments from this program, science equipment. It's wonderful. My question is, as time has gone by, I've been around a long time in the New Orleans public schools. How do I convince other teachers to get enthusiastic about Donors Choose? They need to see you. They need to hear from you, because people say, oh, it's just another site. But I've explained to them what's happened to me. How could any words you can give me?
So first of all, congratulations on your 3 funded projects. Please thank those colleagues of yours who have used our site to get some of the materials they need. Thank you for sharing that. It makes my day to hear those anecdotes. And I think 2 things I would say to those colleagues who think, oh, it's just another site. And I appreciate this. I think the reason why Donors Choose got off the ground is that it was one teacher telling fellow teachers to give something a try, because teachers are just like numb to everybody's like next great solution. And so I get the skepticism. 2 things I would say to them. One is, To create a project on Donors Choose, you do not need any experience with grant writing whatsoever. In fact, it's better that you have never written a grant application before, because the citizen donors on our site don't want to read academic jargon or fancy talk and technical language. They just want to hear a teacher speaking from the heart about an experience they want for their students and the materials necessary for that experience to happen. Second thing I would tell them is that more than 65%, is about 68% of the projects posted on Donors Choose get fully funded. Now, on one hand, it means 32% do not, and it stinks to look at those 32% that don't get fully funded, but a 68% success rate is about 20% higher than the success rate of a project on Kickstarter, 25% higher than the likelihood that something you put up for sale on eBay will actually be sold, and probably 10 times higher than the likelihood of being funded if you submit a grant application to a traditional foundation, in addition to taking a fraction of the time as what it would take to send a grant application to a traditional foundation. So those are the two things I'd say. You don't need any experience with grant writing, and you got a better than 50% chance of being funded. Those are the two talking points, I think.
Hi, I'm Alex. I work in communications and social media for a nonprofit, and I'm really curious as to how you guys have used social media over the years to further your cause. It's a huge resource for us because it's free, so it's completely free advertising, doesn't have to come out of a marketing budget. And obviously, social media has evolved from when you founded the organization, so I'm really curious as to how you've used that.
Yeah, so we are still learning. Of course, we've maintained a vibrant Twitter and Facebook, Instagram presence. And I just had a great meeting with the founder of Snapchat day before yesterday. And we've actually struggled to generate donations through social media, with Twitter especially. There are occasional exceptions. Once on the hottest day of the year, we once tweeted a teacher's project request for air conditioners, and after tweeting that project, it was immediately funded. But with that exception, we've not been able to get people to donate based on tweets. Nor have we really been able to drive a huge amount of dollars from Facebook status updates that we publish. So our goals with those two is really just to build up a large community, assume that it's making a real contribution to brand awareness that will, 3 steps down the line result in donations, but we don't try and use Twitter and Facebook immediately to generate donations. What does generate huge amounts of money is when teachers post their projects to their friends on Facebook. That brings in, this school year alone, probably $2 million of donations will be made from people saying, oh, whoa, my friend who's a teacher, I'm seeing on Facebook that they have a project up, I'm going to donate now.
Hi, my name is Nicole Gelb. I'm a garden teacher at John Dibert Community School here in New Orleans. I just uploaded my first Donors Choose project last night.
Awesome.
I asked for lots of shovels.
So there are hundreds of people here who are going to have $25 gift cards to fund your project. So talk with them. Yeah.
My question is, I noticed when I was shopping for different supplies that there's selective vendors that you can choose from. Yeah. I think it would be really cool if eventually I could take the money that's donated and use it at local vendors.
Yes.
We have nurseries in New Orleans that we could get lots of plants from, stuff like that. So I'm wondering if that's a path that you're heading towards.
That's such a good point to bring up. And I can remember during the first year of Donors Choose when we were operating out of my classroom, and I was personally purchasing every material, and I heard about the very first bookstore to open in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, a low-income neighborhood, and I was like, whoa, what if we could source all of our books not from, Barnes & Noble, but from this neighborhood bookstore opening up in a low-income community? How awesome would that be? So I'm totally with you on the vision. What's tough, and then we'll come back to a way that you can do it. The initial tough challenge is that we think it's important to purchase the resources and deliver them to you so that you don't have to cash a check and drive to a store and fill something out in triplicate and then get reimbursed 2 months later, and it's inefficient, high overhead, and also a pain in the butt for you. We want to purchase the resources and have them delivered, drop shipped straight to you. And that requires vendors that can plug into us electronically. We want to enable you, as you saw, right? Like you put together your multi-vendor shopping cart. You're like, I want that, I want that, I want that. That goes into this multi-vendor shopping cart. And when your project is funded, our system automatically takes what your multi-vendor shopping cart and sends it out as purchase orders to those vendors. They invoice us electronically. We pay electronically. If an item is out of stock, their robot tells our robot that, and then we tell you, hey, could you pick a replacement for the same cost? And this all sounds very technical, but what I'm really saying is we eliminated a huge cost, a huge source of overhead by automating this procurement and purchasing process. And our dream, though, is Amazon is one of the vendors that's plugged into our site. Mom and pop stores can plug into Amazon as third-party sellers, and that's one way that we want to do this at scale. And then as soon as your shovels project is funded and you send in feedback, you'll then have enough points, enough standing in the Donors Choose system to submit a special request, which does not need to be sourced via one of those plugged-in vendors, and you absolutely can, after this one project, source your materials from a local vendor, and I hope you do. And I'm Charles at donorschoose.org, and please email me both for the current project and the new one that you'll submit that'll be locally sourced.
Hi. Thank you. I'm Andrew from Pittsburgh. This is pure genius, and what really gives me hope is the fact that through your site and your work that we as a society believe in education and we will pay for it and we will invest in it. So thank you for making that possible. My question is, what is the future? What does the next 5 years look like? This is such a dynamic marketplace in terms of philanthropy and social media and all that. What's going to happen, do you think?
Yeah, thank you for asking, and thank you for your kind words. We have two goals. One is about the dollars and the numbers on our site. So we want to inspire 1 million people to give $100 million to projects at 100% of our country's high-poverty public schools, all in one school year. 1 million people, $100 million, 100% of our country's high-poverty schools, all inside of one school year. And we're a little more than halfway toward that goal, and we think we're going to hit it in 2 years' time. So that's one goal. The second is we dream of being able to point to billions of dollars of government education spending that has become smarter and more responsive as a result of insights in the data that we've opened up. We want to point to billions of dollars of government education spending where policymakers are clearly listening to teachers and making budgeting decisions based on what teachers are telling the powers that be about what's most needed, what activities are most effective, what books are best, as expressed by the projects that they're creating on our site. Yeah.
Hello. Sorry.
Hey,
Hello?
I got a hoarse voice too. Hey.
Yeah. Our school, for us to have clubs, and I'm sure this goes for other schools too, it's a lot of student-based work, and not all the time do we have teachers to back us up like most of our clubs.
Yeah.
Starts out with students campaigning, and eventually we hire someone outside of the school to bring people in. But my question is, can students or students with a counselor perhaps be able to start asking for donors? Because recently I tried to start a boxing club, but due to the lack of money in my school, it got put down really quick, and now my friend Isabel is trying to start a gardening club.
Yeah.
And we would like, it's a lot of student-based work, so I was wondering, can kids from the school use donorchoose.com as well?
I have 70 colleagues, and they would be like out of their chairs high-fiving you right now because, and I risk saying something that shouldn't be public quite yet, but let's just say that internally my colleagues and I have been talking about whether we could open our site to projects created by students who would connect their project to a teacher sponsor, just like an after-school club has a faculty advisor. And we're not sure yet if and when we'll be able to do it, but we've been talking about it, and I'm hopeful. And I would just be thrilled if your boxing club and Isabel's gardening club were two of the first projects. Think of it as Kickstarter for young people. And we absolutely share that dream and hope to have some more specifics in like a couple months. Great question. Great question. So with that, thank you so much for the time that you've spared. And make sure you spend your $25 Donors Choose gift card on a project that speaks to you.